Starting off this morning, we've got a lot of geek stuff to go into these days. We'll get into a little bit of that in this first session. But when we were sitting around as a program team discussing how we wanted to proceed with this, what we needed to include, there were all these yeah buts. And it's like, yes, we're going to cover front of house mixing, but there's communication. Yes, we're going to cover monitor mixing, but there's focus and mission. There's things that are unique to your audience, and we thought we'd start a couple minutes this morning by building on those. Ben Williams, who's here with me, is someone I've known since he was a entrepreneurial college student, actually built his own program on entrepreneurship, brought live sound creds with him that started at age 14, and has built his own business, Essential Audio, here in Middle Tennessee, based out of Nashville and serving the whole Southeast and beyond, but a lot of work in Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and a lot of work in industrial support for the Huntsville Tech Corridor and such as well as of late. And one of my great resources when I was editing a House of Worship magazine and needed a story next week that said, hey Ben, what have you done cool lately? And we managed to put together some nice profiles on that. So Ben and I are going to sit up here and we're going to go through this list, and we can go back to the PowerPoint here for a moment. Okay. So wearing each other's shoes was the title that we put on this session, and that's because there is within any organization, but certainly within a house of worship, there's a need for you to look at everything that you're doing from other people's perspectives as well as by your own narrow focus. And of course our goal is technical excellence, and that's what we're here to talk about, is to improve those technical chops. But through this up there is audio glitches are noticed more readily than glitches in lighting and video, or at least they're remembered more. You don't seem to get the person coming up to them afterwards and saying, boy, they missed that lighting cue, but they certainly got that pop, they certainly got that dropped word, that microphone that didn't get turned on. And such, and they're less forgiving on that. So technical excellence is our goal because we want to avoid those glitches. So ultimately, though, the tech teams work in support of ministry, in support of a ministry mission, and the drive here then is to figure out what that mission is and where we put it in. So this goes for any tech and any kind of support mission, and I'd spend a lot of time in studios and such as well. And attitude is a true core value. People will argue that you can't teach it, and there's probably a certain amount of truth to that, but I think you can groom it to a certain extent. Certainly you should embrace it when it's right. If you're hiring somebody or you're appointing somebody, embrace the person that's already got the right attitude. But if they don't, there are things you can do. Good habits promote good attitude. This thing's behind me, so I'm having to put my hand on my shoulder. Eyes on the ultimate ministry goals also promote a good attitude because, again, it puts you in the position of supporting the goals for everyone, and listening is paramount. So conversation between teams, talking between teams, and moving on. So the slide behind you says focus, develop a comprehensive plan. But let's talk a little bit, Ben, because I know you have a particular mindset that says people need to talk. They need to communicate. They need to do that. You go into churches all over and find dysfunctional communication. Describe that.
So what, I'm curious to know what everybody's roles are. Are we tech directors, or there's an element of oversight of volunteers probably present, I would imagine. So yeah, I just observed over and over how there can kind of be silos. I mean, the 3 or 4 people back in the booth are kind of talking amongst themselves, and a little punk on the stage. Like there can be an attitude, and on the stage the guys are like, what are they doing back there? I don't know. You notice these tensions can develop, and so what I do often is especially for somebody that's new to this. I mean, seasoned sound people kind of get this, but new people don't. I have them hold a microphone and walk up on the stage and envision 300 sets of eyes on them, or 500 sets of eyes, or 800 sets of eyes, or whatever. And realize that at some point, when you're in that situation, like, I mean, there's 50 sets of eyes on me, but our central nervous systems go into high alert when we're in front of a bunch of folks, and we're hyper aware of the passing of time. We're hyper aware of everything that's going on. Conversely, when you're back there behind the sound console or running ProPresenter or whatever it is, no eyes are on you until you do have massive feedback when you unmute the microphone, and then you know what that feels like, right? But I like to go, it's kind of dramatic, but you're their belay. I mean, you are their support system, at least at an emotional level. It'd be nice if you were keyed in and you weren't scrolling through Facebook, 30 seconds before the service starts, right? You should be with them, but the environment doesn't automatically bring that about. So I try to get people to imagine what that would be like. You've practiced all week. You're a growing musician. You worked on your solo. Doesn't get unmuted till halfway through. That's a bummer because the person wasn't paying attention. So, and likewise, take the musicians back to the console and say, here's how you adjust monitors. And let's get 4 people shouting at you, I want more whatever, right? And, hey, I can't hear the guitar. And they walk off, like, come on, play it, tell me if it's better. Just stuff that isn't necessarily intuitive for people that aren't experienced. There's ways to kind of get them to get outside of their own head.
When you have an appreciation for what the other person's job is, then it just raises the bar on reducing tension and appreciation, because nobody's job is easy. Again, a musician coming and maybe trying to push the buttons and figure out how to set the monitor mix to start is going to be fumbling and figuring it out. And it's like, okay, I got to rely on these guys. I need to work with them. I need to build a rapport. I need to build a relationship. And likewise to the front. If you're an audio guy and you do your job right, only someone who appreciates what you're doing will be the one that says, hey, good job today. Because everybody else, it's just blind to it. When you do your job, the audio is what it's supposed to be. It's there. It's in support of the mission. It's support of the mission. It's support of the ministry. It's support of the goal. And it's a part of the infrastructure at that point, as are you as the tech. So it behooves you to build those relationships so they know that they've got, and they can appreciate what you're doing as well. When you're focusing on that mission, it says now develop a comprehensive plan. And I know planning is something that's essential to you. In this environment, there's a lot of tendency to wing it. Everybody's busy, especially when you've got volunteers that are doing jobs. They've got day jobs during the week. Rehearsals are even a little bit of a strain to work in. Learning it, taking time to go and sit with the console and poke with it and learn its pathways and run signals through different ways and such just isn't always easy. So but showing up on Sunday morning barely in time to get behind the console and push the faders up, that's not a plan. So the overall tech team has to have a vision, and this includes lighting, and this where applicable, and this includes video where applicable, and it includes working with the ministers to get there. So practice. Again, you got a plan. It doesn't do any good if it's not intuitive, if it's not natural to you. You can't refer to your plan in the heat of battle. It's got to be something that's rehearsed, just like moves on a sports team and such. It becomes a muscle memory, a mental reaction, a expected reaction, so you know how to react at any given moment and know what's expected of you intuitively. And the only way to do that is practice, just like playing an instrument. You have to practice to know how to hit that note seamlessly, how to hit that chord, and you have to do the same thing in mission. There you go. And when something goes wrong, develop contingency plans. And again, you're going to have to practice those procedures as well. Getting your team together, simulating that kind of thing. The only way to get, I have rehearsed crisis management up there, but the only way to really get that to be instinctive is put yourself in the position where you've done it. It's mental muscle memory.
Yeah, and I would add, I've also noticed a lot of churches have the one person
Mm-hmm.
that can troubleshoot, and I agree. I mean, it's a gap that has to be bridged. Like how do you patch? I mean, even people think, oh, you just turn it on, right? I mean, that's a thing. Like your administration needs to understand there's a lot to this thing. I mean, especially in the digital console world. I mean, it's not just turn it on. It really isn't. And you don't want to be the person that gets the phone call and we just had the wedding and now we're trying to put this thing back together. I mean, you want to have multiple people. That's a recipe for burnout. If you're that person, your days are numbered if you don't educate. Watch it happen.
Yeah, again, it is much more than just the mixing, because you need to know that, and we're going to get to that in a moment. And again, paying constant attention. Pay constant attention to the job at hand. No texting, no exploring on the computer. If you don't, it's just like driving. You need to be scanning the stage. If there's multiple people involved at any moment, you need to watch what they're doing, anticipate what they're doing, and anticipate their mistakes and errors, just like you would a driver who's sweeping into your lane or failing to stop at a traffic light and coming on across. You've got to pay attention constantly, and everything may go smooth, and you may have a tendency to let your mind wander or get bored or whatever, but that's your job while you're there, and that's your role. So keep paying attention. Various roles. I mean, we've done that. We said we've got some tech team leaders in here and administrators. We have a lot of volunteers. Those various roles come into play in different ways. Mixers, stage managers, but the responsibilities must be clearly defined. One thing that I've seen in a number of small churches is there's one sound guy. And that sound guy's in a booth that may be upstairs at the back of the church, and I know one that's even got a little spiral staircase that can barely have one person on it to get up to their booth. If there's something going on the stage, if a mic needs to be swapped out, and there's not somebody that has, stage manager is a more formal term than a church might use, but if there's not someone that can be that utility player down there, and communication gets into that as well. How do you get a hold of them? Most smaller churches, mid-sized churches, don't have comm systems. So it's not like the guy can hit a button and say, hey, George, swap out that mic with a spare. Drop out number 8 with number 9, or so-and-so's backed off that, or the mic's positioned wrong or whatever, and they're about to do their solo. Whatever you can do inconspicuously enough to be a contributor. A stage manager would be an amazing boon to a lot of churches if there's communication. Is that, what communication during the service is there?
Yeah, I mean,
hand signals.
There's so many ways to do it, right? And a lot of us are winging it. I mean,
yeah.
Now you've got options for stage display on Pro Presenter and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But Dante intercoms, you can loop back into the
Mm-hmm.
to the consoles. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it, but it's worth taking some time to figure out what you might need to communicate beforehand and putting that infrastructure into place.
So by responsibilities clearly defined, really writing it out. Everyone needs to know this is your job, this is your responsibility. It needs to be written. Job descriptions benefit everyone. Particularly with volunteer staff. They're coming in and they're saying, okay, we're going to train you on this. You're drinking from the fire hose, as the old cliche goes, and you're absorbing so much information. Having tools to go back to, and I'll talk about some of the other tools later, but a job description is a start saying, these are the things you are responsible for. Defines in your head what you've got to learn, what you've got to focus on, and where you've got to go. And it's important. It's really important.
Yeah, whose job is it to line check? And when is that supposed to be done?
Mhm.
Like how many times have we watched musicians wait on stage and wait and wait and like, you have it now? No. You're like, I mean, it would be nice if 10 people weren't waiting on, 15 minutes of line checking. I mean, there's a certain amount of troubleshooting that's going
Right.
to be inherent, but there's no reason for that.
You can prevent
Right,
most of the
yeah.
things that are going wrong if you do take care of your responsibilities ahead of time in regards to setup, line check, that sort of thing for sound check. So signal flow, and this is my pet peeve, and this is for everybody that works in every kind of tech. And I was, like I said, a broadcast engineer for a number of years. And when a radio station goes down and you've got to think, okay, the path from the microphone to the console to the processing rack to the studio transmitter link to the transmitter, where in this path did something go wrong? Do I need to drive 10 miles to a transmitter shack, or do I need to go to the studio? And once I get there, where can you find these things? If you don't have a block diagram in your head of where those path goes, of where the signal path goes, and based on descriptions, being able to find that quickly, troubleshooting becomes remarkably more difficult. When I moved from broadcast to recording studios, the console itself, the $500,000 SSL console had more sophisticated signal flow than the entire radio station did. And learning that going around. So block diagrams, they had a huge one that was like 6 foot by 4, and we had it on the wall in the machine room. And I stared at that thing so many times, and somebody said, well, I can't get this. And it's like, follow that path out on that through a block diagram. You probably have to draw your own for your own place. Now, this, Ben, you've never seen this before. This was drawn completely out of my head for a magazine illustration, but a core block diagram for someone to say what's going on. Obviously, if you're doing it in your own situation, you might number where those wired mics go in, what inputs are there, what inputs are used. Those wireless receiver could be potentially at the console. They could be at the stage box, wherever they are. But this is the elements. And once you get into the digital console world, then that console looks like a analog console. You've got an input, you select where signals are going. Oh, that one's it. There we go. Microphone gain, on-off switch, send and return. The thing about, in the digital standpoint, you may have a button for those, but the button is actually controlling, very, very rarely is the button actually controlling something physical. Know how your path is set up, how you have it standard set up in the configuration that you can get back to quickly and know where all these levels are. If you don't have enough of something in the monitor, you're going to reach for the aux level, obviously. If you don't have enough in the PA, you're going to reach for the channel fader. If you've got to pull something down, where is your processing? The other factor with digital consoles, though, is you can move all of that stuff around to a large degree. That DSP can go in front of the fader. The aux in obviously can be after the fader or before the fader. Your pan is typically going to stay in place. Your output matrix is going to stay in place. But processing elements with inside, assignments, everything is so versatile that it's your best friend and your worst enemy at the same time.
More ways to screw up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's harder to see. When you're looking at an analog console and you kind of think about that path being somewhat along the line of the buttons and knobs, it's a lot easier to find what's wrong and figure out a signal and bypass something. If it's in the digital world, you've got to know how you're normally set up, but what you're chasing may actually be because somebody changed something and it's not set up the way it usually is. So.
And I would add, if you have 5 minutes of training for somebody, use 2 seconds of those 5 minutes to say the words, "Don't panic." Put a sign up if you need to. I mean, because my gosh, you could dig yourself in a hole. people get under the gun and they go, oh man, so-and-so's not working, and they push buttons and suddenly there's 5 things that aren't working, and like it's real easy to get real far in the wrong direction real quickly, and that's an important starter tip for volunteers.
Yeah, and most of the time in a house of worship situation, the things that are going to cause you grief are the things with wires, like mics, the things with the wireless receivers and those kind of setups. Snake, probably not going to change much. Digital link, gosh, you hope not. You're relying on that for everything. Yes, something can fail. Somebody could drop something on it, could break a cable or something like that. That's typically not going to happen in the heat of battle either. Where, and even down to the other end, speaker processing, amps and such, you turn those on, you line check them at the first. That's probably not where you're going to look. When I was learning troubleshooting first in the Air Force, they told us the half split method. And some of you who had that kind of thing, you take any system, you have to know your signal flow, you have to know your block diagram in your head and where it is, but you go halfway through that system and say, do I have the signal from the front half? Yes, the problem's up there. Half split the next. If you're trying to work through that and you can't just from the symptoms say, oh gee, that's got to be X, then you have to narrow it down with diminishing spaces or diminishing portions of the signal flow until you get to where you're going. That can be hard in a digital console, again, because so you've got to have a good idea of where it's going. It's always a great idea to have if you've got a channel next to you, if it's not necessarily a heat of battle troubleshooting, but go to the other channel, duplicate it up and see what you can get there and get to it. When you've got triple scale musicians in a studio room, that's what you do. It's like, okay, we're going to move you to fader 17 and I'll fix that one later. Let's get these guys going back to work, because you're paying them to sit there and twiddle their thumbs while we chase this bad EQ card in a console channel.
That brings up another point that seems so obvious to me, but I have witnessed so many times people take their time dealing with like imminent issues such as massive feedback. Like something goes real badly, grab the master fader. Just, deal with it like right now. That would be another point to volunteers. What are the catastrophic, everything's going crazy on stage. Do something. Don't just, I don't know. It just kind of boggles my mind, like, what are you doing,
Yeah.
React.
Yep.
Don't panic.
React,
though.
This was a different article, but was doing network, but I only put it on there because once you get into a fully networked environment with network consoles and those things, and you're going to throw in some IT. And if you're an audio tech in the late or these early 2000s and going forward, you're going to have to be a information technology specialist as well as an audio specialist, because that's how it's all going to move around. So we've got a networking session coming up, the AOIP session and those things, but I just popped that in just to say it can simplify the wiring in many cases. And certainly the days of the large, expensive analog 8, 16, 32, 48 pair of snakes are pretty well gone. That's not Megami's business anymore. So we've moved on to that, and Ethernet is king. Now, and I just threw this in, if it moves to it. There we go. Don't even, you have to worry about it. I just try to say, when you're in an analog system, and this one actually has some digital comes in it, you're looking at a much more complex situation. This is just a chunk of a star draw illustration of a facility. But rather than one cable that's got all of that audio multiplexed on it, you've got individual wires, and finding it actually can make it easier to substitute and troubleshoot, because you can just swap a pair of wires. If it moves to a channel, no, the problem stays with the channel, then it's not the lead coming from the microphone. The microphone sounds fine through the good channel. The other mic that you swapped over there sounds bad through the bad channel. It's the channel, not the microphone. Those are the things you can do. easily in analog, and you can do a certain amount of that in digital at the stage box level, but once you get into the system and at the console, it gets more difficult. That was just to say, So, core knowledge. A lot of the things we're going to be teaching here over the next couple of days, but the core knowledge is, in broad strokes, knowing your gear operationally. Now, again, I keep talking my own history, but when I came into college at MTSU and I was studying radio TV, and they opened up the labs for us for us to just come in and experiment before they had really done much instruction on it. And it's like, yeah, I'm into that. I was the only one there. I spent 2 or 3 hours, 2 or 3 days in a row, and I ran signal through every path I could and tried to figure out what every switch did and consult the manuals. I read block diagrams, read schematics, and figured out what everything did. And most everyone else waited until the first assignment. And the first assignment comes and people are going in there and they're like sitting there and it's like they've never touched the gear before. You know, it's like a 5-minute assignment. For me, it was 2 hours for them because they had to build up on all those things. Knowing what you're doing in advance and experimenting, making your mistakes when it's not critical. We'll be talking about virtual sound checks and stuff later, but if you've got the capability within your system to do a virtual sound check and to put tracks through a system, there's nothing better than a new person can do that's learning that signal flow, is to get in and experiment. Have your great presets set on your digital console so you can get exactly back where you were when they started if they chase you down there. But knowing that gear, going into manuals, going into that, asking questions of the folks that have been there before, and just experimenting and learning. Again, it's mental muscle memory. So, come on. There we go. And that's what I just said. Being able to return to a defined starting point. That can't be overemphasized, and even sometimes in the heat of a battle, a snapshot recall is way better than chasing rabbits for a problem that you're not going to find right away. You can say, well, yeah, I've tweaked the mix since this and this and this morning, but the starting point was pretty darn close. Let's pull back to there. Let's get to where we have a known place to go. This was your line, Ben. Know what you don't know.
Preach. Yeah. If you think you know, you can't learn. Again, if you're a tech director, you probably have bumped up against this. You got to be teachable. I've been into this stuff. I mean, I'm just fascinated with sound, and I learn something new at least every week, usually every day. Been doing, interested in it for 20 years at least. You don't need to be a know-it-all, and I don't know what it is about our world, but it's almost like a rite of passage to be a know-it-all at first. I don't know what that is, and I don't really know how to deal with it.
And often a certain territoriality.
Oh yeah, king of the console. I mean, that's a thing.
Protecting their position or that's what they want to do.
Right.
And they've got a calling, perhaps, but it's like, yes, you want to keep people from just walking up casually and pushing knobs, of course.
Yep.
But at the same time, it's the more you share, the more people that can have an appreciation for what you're doing and have a knowledge of what you're doing, the better off you are in the long run. Territoriality doesn't get you anywhere.
These guys and girls don't have that issue though, because they're
there you go.
Here to soak in things.
Okay. And what you just said, there we go. Learn continually. Getting by isn't enough. Knowing enough to get by is a recipe for disaster. It will lead in failure at some time because you don't know enough to excel.
Yeah, that phrase, enough to be dangerous, right? I mean, it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm. And we've been talking about this a lot. We won't draw it on again here, but learn logical troubleshooting. Again, it's not beyond. Again, go to my own experience when I was being taught troubleshooting. They would break things deliberately. And yeah, you knew the tube in that transmitter that was going to be bad was if you pulled them all out, it was the one they painted a white dot on the bottom. You learned that after a few days, but that was cheating. And I tried to avoid doing that because I wanted to know how to figure it out from there. So they taught you the methods: injecting signals, stranging, swapping. Change one thing at a time before you expect results. There's a big troubleshooting thing. If you change 6 things and it's suddenly better, you didn't learn which thing it was, and you might have caused something else to go wrong. And getting back to where you were, you start changing a lot. Change one thing at a time. Test, test, test. But in the heat of battle, pull the master fader down or do whatever you've got to do to get the sound going again. But the more change, the more likelihood that you're going to get into trouble. Communication, we talked about a little bit earlier. Come on. There we go. So, in your experience in working with folks where, let's talk about it in terms of a church that's making a plan and making a technical plan, and they've got the guys in the trenches that know the console that they want, and they know the loudspeakers that are their favorite, and they know exactly what they want to do, and we're going to get these microphones, or we're going to do that. They're going to face realities of budget and perhaps realities of mission and goals. So how does that process work best? I'm sure you've seen worst. We could ask for worst too. But
I mean, it works best when condescension is completely out the window. And I don't know if it was Einstein said this. You don't really understand it if you can't explain it to someone else, right? And so I see lots of situations where there's tension between an administrator and a sound person that's got googly eyes for the next $100,000 or whatever, right? And they don't get it. There's this kind of contentious grumbling thing, and the administrator's like, we have money, we want to spend. I don't really know that you know what you're talking. And so there's value in going like, let's get outside of our own heads. Let's talk about what we're actually going to accomplish, which does require kind of more of an introspective sort of approach. Like, why do I want the $100,000 console? What does it actually do for us? And so again, it's getting outside of the silos. It's getting outside of the kind of segmented thinking.
Yeah, we all have our favorite and preferred play toys, but and ways we want to work, but that's not always the best thing. And again, then talking within your tech team, and that's whoever's responsible for video and lighting and audio, working together as a team to know how to share cues, to know how to complement what the other one's doing at appropriate times, figuring out what it's going to take within your tech team, and I've got a little bit on later on, but scheduling and filling in.
Yeah, and I would add also, if you were the person that really wants the toy, come on. I mean, maybe get it, maybe, but be willing to back up and go, does this make sense for our organization? Like, if I'm out of the picture, are they biting off something that's just ridiculous? Because I have that, I install and design and install systems for churches for a living, and I've had that happen, and I'm more and more I'm trying to be proactive on the front end of like, okay, you want to buy this stuff, and it's cool. I mean, I would like to sell it to you, but I want you to not end up with a X when you need really Y, and just somebody wanted X, and now you've got tens of thousands of dollars tied up in something that was just about one person's thing. Like, be willing to zoom out and go, hey, maybe this $100,000 whatever does make sense for our organization, but don't just do stuff because you want to do it.
Yeah, a friend of mine worked for Solid State Logic, running their tech department out of New York City, and the salespeople would come back and say, "Oh, so and so's going to order this." And, no, that's not what they need. That's not going to work what they need. Eventually he became a vice president of technology or something like that, but he still kind of oversaw the tech shop, didn't get into it day to day. But his job was, when they're about to close the sale, he would go spend a day or two with the folks that were building the studio, that were going, asking them all the pointed questions about what they were going to do, how they were going to be using it, where it was going to be placed physically, what they were interfacing with, and he would come back and says, okay, this is what they need to order, and would write it again according to mission goals, in this case, ministry goals, and making sure that it was exactly what they need and had the additions. And that may be scaled back from what they were originally doing. It may be that that footprint was too big for the room or whatever, but it was more in capabilities of feature set, and in those cases there were a lot of options and stuff to it. In this case, the feature set may be a slightly bigger console, a slightly smaller console, a slightly less expensive console, because you don't need all the bells and whistles, but defining that on a mission-specific basis. And they found they had repeat customers and happier customers because of that, because what some of the sales guys were speccing was not exactly what the customer needed. They ended up adding things on and sending people down. It cost the company money. It cost the customer grief and irritation. So going into that on that front end can help that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
One more quick note on
Go
that. Also, again, to the communication between administrative types and technical people. It would be good if your administrator understands that, okay, we're going to spend $250,000 or however much money on this system. Let's just be upfront about staffing wise what you really need to consider. I mean, because it seems evident to me. I mean, you buy $250,000 worth of computers, they're going to need to be maintained, and you're going to need to have somebody attending to that technology as it needs to be worked on. But somehow people don't intuitively necessarily think that about this world. But it's absolutely the case. I mean, they are computers now. Everything's a computer. There's firmware issues. There's maintenance issues. There's reset after an Easter service or a wedding or what. I mean, there's so many things, and we're talking about really complex stuff, right? And again, the sometimes that requires some back and forth, because a lot of times, administrative types will go, well, why do we need all that? Well, again, do you want a web stream or do you not? And be willing to stay in that. Be willing to stay in that tension. I'm not trying to be territorial. Don't try to be territorial, right?
And those decisions going in need to include maintenance of a system, as well as what is it going to take to keep it up. Modern electronics are pretty good. A lot of times you can't do a lot of actual getting down to component level repair, but a computer system like that, you need backups. If you're relying on that computer system for everything and you don't have backups, then it's a recipe for disaster at some point. If you don't have a good file structure so you can find things, then it's frustration and aggravation on your staff. But remember a recording engineer at one time who said, in regard to just cut a track and we were getting safety spade, and he said, digital data that only exists in one place for all intents and purposes doesn't exist at all. So it's worthwhile to do backups. It's a hassle. There is an expense involved. There's time involved.
It's cheap, though. I mean, my goodness.
These days, storage is so cheap.
Dropbox is so cheap.
So training, do you have the knowledge that's needed for what you're doing? And does your team cross-train? Those are 2 points that I'd like to get into. When you're going in with a customer's putting in a new console, a new system, is training part of your process on that? And it could be you, or it could be the manufacturer's rep, or...
A lot of times, there's somebody that's familiar with the little console or whatever. I mean, whatever it is. But I at least try to give people a crash course. And my experience is, you plan and you create this time, and a couple people show up, and you thought you were going to have more. I don't know if you guys experience that, but I try to at least at least give people an appreciation for the complexity. And to your point, you need to dig around in it and mess up when you're not under the gun and really learn how it works. But there's lots of videos. I mean, gosh, you can learn a lot on YouTube when it comes to operational, factors of at least the more widespread consoles and stuff like that.
It's a whole different world now. How many repairs do I do around the house just by saying, well, somebody's probably done that, and you go to YouTube and on obscure changing the battery in an electric toothbrush or something, and you find 14 videos on YouTube for that. And there's the similar thing in our world. So immersing yourselves in that with a awareness filter that not everybody who's making a YouTube video is as cool and hip and knowledgeable as everyone else. But
Absolutely.
so, but going to manufacturers, the manufacturers are putting more and more online and making those resources available. Cross-training is something that I think is very valuable, and we'll talk a little bit later about scheduling and covering for people and such too. But if you've got one audio guy or gal in your church, and they're doing everything every Sunday, they can't take a vacation, they can't take a breather, and if they bring someone in to train them just to cover one weekend they're going to be away, most likely that person's not going to be trained as well, and it's going to be so cross-training and making sure that various people on your tech staff can do each other's jobs, that you have various people that can be camera operators, that can run the video switcher, that can do audio and front of house. So I encourage cross-training in and which kind of gets me to this list. So winging it is a prescription for error. If you're going in and you're just flying on the basis of what you know, it's likely. Okay, cliche alert. Failing to plan is planning to fail. You've heard that one many a time. But if you do fail to map things out. So going back to what Ben had said earlier, I believe in lists. Time
They're
task
annoying.
lists.
I'm annoyed by them, but I use them.
Well, personally, I do. I tend to. You got to find the place that makes a list work for you.
But don't you want your pilot to follow a pre-flight checklist?
Exactly.
It's not that it's that high stakes, but man,
Yeah.
especially if this is not a week in, week out thing for people. It's
right. But mapping these things out ahead of time and having a time task list. What time is something supposed to be done, and what is supposed to be done by a particular service night type. So you have two services on Sunday morning. 90 minutes before service 1, you're going to do this, 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 and this. Before service 2, you're still going to check this and back up on that. Knowing those things and having them out there, even the most experienced tech, and I think I may even have that point on the slide up there, can forget something. So at least having that checklist, even if you're just scanning it down there, even if you know everything, you come in and do it, but you've got a buffer of time, but you can at least scan the list and say, oh, I forgot. So set up checklists too as well. So yes, you've got a time task list. You're going to do this at 9 a.m. Is there a list of little things that you can click by that? Did you check the batteries in the wireless connection? Did you turn it on and make sure that the receiver was picking it up and was set on the same channel? Did you make sure you had signal with the console from that particular microphone? Whatever those tasks are that can ensure you're not going to run into trouble later. The worst thing you can do is just walk in and turn all the switches on and then sit down and be ready to go. So like I said, even the experience can miss a step when you're working from memory, and lists are a lifeline when you've got substitutes in. So if you're the great pro, I'm sure we've got Buford's not in here at the moment. Buford Jones, who's a famous front of house engineer, teaches here at Belmont some now, and I doubt Buford's working from lists, and he's done it so long that it's instinctive and such to him. But if somebody had to fill in for him and didn't know how he had set up and what he was doing and what the cues were night after night, it'd be a real problem. So scheduling is another, does everyone know, maybe you are not fortunate enough that maybe you're the only audio guy there. Maybe you don't have someone that can back you up, so you just know exactly when you're supposed to be there. But if you can cross-train, if you can work with a little bit of a team and shuffle some positions around, if you've got people that can back you up so that maybe you only have to do 3 Sundays and have a Sunday off, or you have to do every other or something like that. Scheduling, knowing when people are supposed to be there, it's just simple. Who needs to be where, when. And contingency scheduling. What's your plan? What's your schedule? When somebody can't do it, what do they do? Is there a call tree? Is there a setup? Is there a backup person listed on there? Just think about these things. What do we do if, heaven forbid, if Ben has hit the coronavirus this week and he's in quarantine or been near somebody with it? We won't give it to you. But he's spending 2 weeks in quarantine, and you don't want him in there, but you're going to miss him. So
You will miss me.
So again, back to our original concept. Listening is job one, and that's listening to your worship leaders to know what their mission, their goals are, and your musicians to know what their needs are. Listening to your team to know where there are issues, to know where everyone's going to be and that you're on the same page, and to your congregation, because ultimately,
Because God told them to tell you to turn it down.
yeah, yeah, you got to take that with a grain of salt, because yes, there's always going to be somebody that was too loud, and there's always going to be somebody else that it wasn't loud enough, and those aren't those. But knowing what they need and what they can hear, and listening to your sound, of course. So let's bracket back around to the tech, because you've got to have ears. You've got to have ears on. You've got to know what it's supposed to sound like, and where you're going with it. So I hope that that by setting that stage with that a bit, that you've got a little bit of a foundation for what we're going to be covering. Most of what we're going on from here on out is pure in the tech, but we had enough folks saying, let's bring everyone's attention to say, when you're addressing this and you're addressing in front of house, let's look at it from a mission goal point of view. We've got a couple of minutes if there was anybody that had any immediate questions. Ben's going to be up next talking acoustics, but anybody? Okay. Well, Ben's going to take over here in a minute. He's going to do an acoustics primer, which is critical core knowledge, as we discussed earlier, and things that you need to know about how sound moves within a room, how sound moves with people within it, and how you, as not expecting to teach you to walk out of here and tune your system, not expecting you to be able to install a system, but you, like so many of the other steps that we said, you've got to have an appreciation and a knowledge of what those various steps are. So when you're in the heat of battle, you can appreciate the signal flow, you can appreciate that something's changed, and how to at least evaluate it, to call in a specialist if you need to, and understand care and feeding your sound system. So, okay. Thank you very much.